Okay, let's unpack this. You know those moments when you react in a way that feels, well, totally out of character? Or you find yourself stuck in these relationship patterns you know aren't great, but you just can't seem to shake them.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe there's just that persistent kind of low-grade feeling that something fundamental is missing, like a piece of yourself you can't quite put your finger on.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it turns out a lot of these adult struggles, they can often be traced back to something seemingly simple, yet really profound. What happened to us as kids.
Yeah, and not just the big, obvious traumas, right? But also the everyday ways our kind of essential needs might have been missed or overlooked.
Which is precisely what our source material dives into today.
Hmm.
We've been exploring these excerpts from John Bradshaw's really powerful book, Homecoming, Reclaiming and Healing Your Inner Child.
Yeah, it's quite the exploration.
So our mission, really, in this deep dive is to understand this concept of the wounded inner child. You know, how those early experiences stick with us and show up in sometimes surprising ways in our adult lives.
But maybe more importantly, we're going to dig into the path Bradshaw lays out for healing, for reclaiming that vital, vibrant part of ourselves he calls the wonder child.
It sounds like an invitation, almost, to connect with and, well, nurture the emotional, creative core that maybe had to hide away for protection way back when.
That's a good way to think about it, a journey back.
So let's start right at the beginning. What is this inner child concept that Bradshaw describes? And how does it get wounded in the first place?
Okay, so think of the inner child as this sort of emotional, creative, vulnerable core of you. It still holds all the experiences, the feelings, the needs from your childhood. It's not just a memory bank, it's an active part of your psyche right now.
Right, like a living presence.
Exactly. And this core gets wounded, as Bradshaw puts it, when its fundamental developmental needs aren't consistently met.
And we're talking beyond just food and shelter here, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about things like the need for basic trust, for autonomy, being allowed to become your own person, a sense of purpose, competence, and crucially, feeling loved and accepted unconditionally.
That unconditional piece feels huge.
It is. So when a child experiences things like neglect or abandonment, and that could be physical absence or maybe just emotional unavailability or any form of abuse, obviously,
Yeah.
the inner child absorbs those hurts.
And what are the family environment itself?
Well, yeah, growing up in what Bradshaw calls dysfunctional family systems, maybe there were unspoken rules like no feel, where you weren't allowed to show certain emotions, or no talk, where difficult truths just got swept under the rug. That stuff inflicts deep wounds, too.
The source also brings up a really challenging cycle, doesn't it? About parents often carrying their own wounded inner children.
They do. And it's quite heartbreaking, really, because it means they can end up inadvertently parenting from their own unresolved pain, their own unmet needs.
Instead of being the stable base the child needs.
Exactly. They might unconsciously look to the child to fill their emotional gaps, which essentially reverses the healthy parent-child dynamic. It can force the child into this kind of caretaker role, which is, incredibly wounding for a kid.
So all this unresolved energy, this pain from the wounded child, it doesn't just evaporate when we hit 18, right? How does Bradshaw describe its impact? He uses that word contaminating.
Yeah, contaminating. That unresolved energy, it doesn't just stay neatly packed away. It either gets acted out, through behaviors that don't really make sense in the present context.
Like those out-of-character reactions we mentioned?
Could be. Or it gets frozen, numbed out, leaving us feeling disconnected. Bradshaw describes several ways this contamination shows up, often in the areas we struggle with most as adults.
Okay, so what are some of the big ones? Where does this contamination really show up?
Well, relationship problems are a huge one, a really common manifestation. Bradshaw talks about the narcissistically deprived inner child, meaning they didn't get those basic needs for love, validation, mirroring, met in a healthy way back then. So as adults, this can play out as this almost insatiable craving for love or attention.
Like a bottomless pit.
Kind of. No matter how much a partner gives, it never feels like enough. Because deep down, it's a child's unmet need looking for a parent figure to finally fill it, not really an adult partner.
That makes sense. It reminds me of that example, Maximilian in The Source. His whole sense of worth was tied up in his girlfriend's love.
Exactly. So when she left, he felt suicidal. His worth was entirely others' worth, completely external, not rooted inside himself. And, conversely, issues with those early dependency needs can swing the other way, too.
How so?
You might see extremes, either like clinging desperately to others, what Bradshaw calls enmeshment, or retreating completely into isolation, withdrawal. You see these wounded child dynamics contaminating relationships all over the place.
The source also spends quite a bit of time connecting this to addictions and compulsive behaviors.
Yes, definitely. Bradshaw views these, and he includes a broad range, not just substance addictions, but also things like workaholism, control issues, spending, gambling, even cognitive addictions like obsessive thinking.
Wow, okay.
He sees them as ways we try to pathologically alter painful moods or numb out that unresolved pain, that frozen grief. It's this desperate search for external relief or control because the internal world just feels too overwhelming or too empty.
His own story comes up there, right?
Yeah.
With alcoholism and work addiction.
It does, a very powerful personal example, pushing himself to work 100 hours a week, developing physical problems. It illustrates that desperate attempt to manage internal pain through external means, through doing or consuming.
And it feels like underneath so much of this is what Bradshaw calls toxic shame.
Yes, he really identifies toxic shame as the core wound. It's different from healthy shame, which might tell you, oops, I made a mistake. Toxic shame tells you, I am a mistake.
Like something is fundamentally wrong with your being.
Exactly. That you are inherently flawed, worthless. And it gets inflicted through things like chronic abandonment, ridicule, abuse, neglect, or growing up in these super perfectionistic systems where you can never measure up. Even cultural prejudices can instill it.
And it thrives in secrecy, he says.
Absolutely. That's key. It festers in the dark. It gets passed down through generations, not just through obvious abuse, but through these dynamics of like constant criticism, blame, contempt, judgment, power plays, rage.
Wow.
It leaves people feeling hopeless. And it can drive you towards extremes, either becoming this chronic people pleaser, always trying to earn your worth,
Well, the opposite.
or the opposite, yeah. Excessively rebellious, maybe undisciplined, because deep down, there's this belief that you're fundamentally flawed anyway, so why bother trying?
It sounds like this wounded child part can also leave us kind of stuck with childish ways of thinking, even as adults.
It certainly can. Think about how a young child's mind works. It tends to be absolutist, all or nothing, black and white. It often relies on emotional reasoning. I feel scared, therefore this situation must be dangerous, even if objectively it isn't. I feel it, so it must be true. And it's naturally egocentric.
Meaning it takes everything personally.
Pretty much. Personalizing everything. Believing things like, my parents are fighting, it must be my fault, or something bad happened, I must have caused it.
Like that example in the book, the client whose parents sort of bonded over her eating disorder.
Yes, and that reinforced her egocentric childhood belief that their attention, their relationship even, revolved around her illness. It's a stark example.
So that egocentric filter, which is normal for a little kid, just figuring out the world,
Becomes a really damaging way to interpret reality when you carry it unconsciously into adulthood.
Yeah.
And these are just, scratching the surface, but you can see how the wounded child's pain, its patterns, its ways of thinking just ripple through our adult lives, impacting how we connect, how we cope, how we see ourselves.
Okay, so if this is the wounded part, the contamination, what's the path to healing? Bradshaw talks about it as a homecoming. That sounds hopeful.
It is hopeful. Homecoming is essentially the journey back to ourselves. Specifically, it involves revisiting, in a safe way, those earlier developmental stages to address what he calls unfinished business.
And how do we do that?
The core of the healing process is developing what Bradshaw calls the grown-up you, your potent, capable adult self. This adult self learns to step into the role of the nurturing, protective parent that the inner child needed back then, but maybe didn't fully get.
Like becoming your own good parent, almost like a magical stranger or a wise wizard for your younger self, as he puts it.
That's a lovely way he describes it, yeah. This adult self provides what Bradshaw terms the 3 Ps for the inner child.
Okay, the 3 Ps.
Potency, permission, and protection. Potency is the adult's strength, their resources, their ability to guide and keep the child safe now. Permission is crucial, giving the inner child permission to finally break those old restrictive family rules. And especially permission to feel all its feelings, even the messy ones.
And protection.
Protection means safeguarding the inner child from further harm, both externally and internally, from those old toxic messages or patterns.
The source also really emphasizes that healing involves embracing original pain. That sounds pretty intense.
It is intense. It's definitely challenging work. It involves doing the necessary grief work, allowing those emotions that were previously frozen or suppressed, the fear, the sadness, the anger, to kind of melt and actually be felt in the body, in the present, by the adult self who can handle them now.
Why is feeling that old pain so important?
Bradshaw connects this to brain science, actually. He talks about how our ego defenses, those coping mechanisms we developed as kids, were often extraordinary measures taken by a young, overwhelmed system just trying to survive unbearable stress. Feeling that original pain, which is essentially stored energy, helps us reconnect to our physical reality. Emotions are physical. It's about releasing that trapped energy so it doesn't keep running the show.
And it sounds like we don't do this alone. Relationships are key.
Absolutely vital. This kind of healing really happens in connection. We need trustworthy others, a therapist, a supportive partner, a group to tell our story to.
Why any disorder?
Because sharing the secrets, especially the shameful ones, is what starts to dissolve that toxic shame. It breaks the isolation. Working with others provides essential mirroring, validation. Just hearing someone say, I understand, or that sounds so hard, can be incredibly healing.
Like those examples from the workshops. The elegant woman crying, the bank president.
Exactly. The woman reading her letter and being embraced by others, the bank president finally crying about his father's abuse after 40 years, or Sabina finding her voice and healing in Coda. These stories really highlight how sharing, being seen, and connecting with others are just central to this whole homecoming process.
The book isn't just theoretical, though. It lays out very specific practices, techniques. What are some of the core ones Bradshaw describes for this reparenting work?
Yeah, he offers a lot of practical tools. One really foundational technique is letter writing.
Boy.
The idea is your adult self writes a letter to your inner child, maybe at a specific age where things were tough, expressing unconditional love, acceptance, promising you'll never abandon them like maybe others did.
And writing from the child, too.
Yes, that's often even more powerful. Writing from your inner child, maybe using your non-dominant hand to bypass the logical brain a bit, letting out their feelings, their longings, their pain. And also, importantly, asking the child's forgiveness for the ways you, as the adult, might have continued the pattern of neglect or silencing them.
That sounds intense, but potentially very revealing. What about affirmations?
Affirmations are key, too. Using specific, positive, affirmative words that the child desperately needed to hear back then but didn't get. Things like, you are wanted, you are precious, it's okay to feel, you can make mistakes, tailored to different developmental needs.
Can the inner child really hear those now?
Bradshaw suggests that even the infant self, who couldn't understand literal words, absolutely registered the energy whether they were truly welcomed or not. So speaking these affirmations, internally or aloud, from your strong, loving adult self, can help melt some of that frozen grief and instill a new message.
Guided imagery and meditations also seem like a way to sort of directly interact with that inner child part.
They're incredibly useful for that, yes. Visualizing your present-day adult self actually meeting your inner child at different ages. Maybe you picture the infant in a room, or the toddler playing, or the school-age child.
And then what?
And then you just sit with them, metaphorically speaking. Talk to them. Listen to what they might want to express. Offer comfort. Give those affirmations. These practices use visualization and body awareness to help you ground yourself in your adult capacity while compassionately connecting with those younger, vulnerable parts.
Bradshaw also introduces this concept called anchoring. What's that about?
Anchoring, in this context, is about creating a link between a positive adult feeling or state and a physical gesture. So you might recall a time you felt really strong or deeply loved or completely safe, and anchor that feeling with, say, touching your thumb and finger together.
Okay, and how does that help?
Then, when you find yourself triggered by an old situation, feeling that old fear or shame, you can consciously fire your positive anchor, make the physical gesture. It brings that positive adult state into the present moment alongside the old feeling. It doesn't erase the old feeling instantly, but it creates a new combined experience. It's like building new neural pathways based on your adult resources.
So, moving from that internal work to more external actions.
Yeah.
What about practicing new behaviors?
Oh, absolutely essential. Because the wounded child often learned unhealthy ways of coping or maybe never developed crucial life skills. So Bradshaw emphasizes actively practicing things, like learning to say no.
Which can be incredibly hard for people pleasers.
Exactly. He mentions the Vice method, practicing saying no in private first, just to yourself, then maybe in low-stakes situations, gradually building up to real-life contexts where it matters. It's about learning to honor your own needs respectfully. And for the inner rebel child, the practice isn't just resisting, it's learning to figure out and articulate what they actually want instead.
That connects directly to setting boundaries, I imagine.
Totally. If you grew up without healthy boundaries or they were constantly violated, learning to establish them as an adult is vital. Writing down your personal boundaries regarding your time, your space, your possessions, your energy.
And sexual boundaries, too, he mentions.
Yes, very important. Defining for yourself, based on self-respect and dignity, with whom, how, when, and where you will be sexual, challenging any old messages that might have linked your worth to sexual compliance or performance.
What about difficult emotions like anger, if that was forbidden?
Another key area for practice. Many dysfunctional families suppress or shame anger. So the work involves learning to get back in touch with that legitimate anger, identifying what you're actually mad at, and then finding appropriate ways to express it. Using I messages, maybe following a model like the awareness model, he mentions, I see, hear this, I interpret it this way, I feel this, I want this.
Learning to fight fair.
Exactly. Practicing rules for constructive conflict, staying in the present, avoiding blame, being specific, being honest, channeling that powerful energy constructively instead of destructively or suppressing it.
The source also brings up nurturing the inner child physically and sensually. What does that look like?
This is often overlooked, but really important. Little kids need physical comfort, touch, reassurance, what Bradshaw calls strokes. And frankly, adults do too. So it's about actively finding ways to give that nurturing to yourself now.
Like?
Simple things, really. Taking a warm bath, getting or giving yourself a massage, wrapping yourself in a soft blanket, enjoying comforting foods, gentle, sensual touch. It helps the inner child feel safe, cared for, and grounded in the body.
And play. Creativity. That seems fundamental too.
Oh, absolutely vital. Bradshaw stresses the importance of engaging in activities just for the pure pleasure and delight of it. Things you might have loved as a kid or things you were curious about.
Like drawing, dancing.
Yeah, or finger painting, playing with clay, listening to music just for joy, spending time in nature, dressing up, making silly noises, whatever brings that sense of unstructured fun. Play is crucial for unlocking imagination, flexibility, and connecting with simple joy, all hallmarks of the healthy child. He argues that hopelessness often stems from a squashed imagination.
Which connects right into freeing the imagination and listening to intuition.
Exactly. Making regular time to just daydream, fantasize, envision new possibilities, even if they seem unrealistic. It challenges that sense of being stuck. And learning to listen to your intuition, that felt thought, that gut knowing that doesn't always have a logical reason. Bradshaw sees this as the voice of your deeper self, your wonder child, guiding you towards something authentic or new.
Like that real estate client example.
Yeah, who followed her gut feeling against all the logical advice and found the perfect place. It's about trusting that inner wisdom more.
Okay, so it really feels like all this work, this challenging but rewarding homecoming, it leads somewhere beyond just patching up the wounds, right? Bradshaw talks about the emergence of the wonder child.
Yes, that's the beautiful culmination, the goal, really.
Yeah.
As the pain of the wounded child is felt, understood, and integrated, the core self, the true essential self, starts to shine through more clearly. That's the wonder child.
And how is the wonder child different from the wounded child?
Bradshaw draws a clear contrast. The wounded child is more connected to the ego, the adapted self, focused on survival, shaped heavily by past experiences and family rules. The wonder child, though, he connects to the soul, the essential self. It's time transcendent, rooted in being and not just doing. It's the source of our creativity, our imagination, our intuition, our spiritual connection.
What does that look like? What are its characteristics?
Things like innate curiosity,
Yeah.
optimism, resilience. He gives that example of the 20-month-old relentlessly trying to climb onto the couch, full of courage, just being in the effort.
Yeah.
Natural playfulness, creativity, imagination, that deep intuition we mentioned. And crucially, a connection to what he calls being, that fundamental sense of I amness.
I amness.
Yeah, that simple, profound sense of existing, of being uniquely you. Bradshaw shares his own experience at a bus stop as a young man, suddenly feeling his unique perspective, his own being. That was a stir of the wonder child. He sees it as the core of our spirituality, maybe even the imago Dei, the image of God within us.
So the wonder child isn't just this, like, happy state we arrive at. It has a role.
Oh, it's active. It's the vital energy, the motivation that pulls us towards doing the hard healing work on the ego. It's the source of the creative power we need to build an authentic life, to find our purpose. It guides us.
And he connects this idea to universal myths, right? like the hero infant in exile.
Yes, those myths across cultures often feature this divine or heroic child, maybe lost or hidden, who represents that exiled, essential part of ourselves, that part that holds the seeds of regeneration, transformation, waiting to be found and reclaimed.
And he sees his own life story through that lens.
Very much so. Overcoming addiction, leaving the seminary, feeling that pull towards psychology, even reconnecting with that childhood passion by building a model airplane. He interprets these as his wonder child stirring, calling him back to his true being, his creative potential, his life's work.
So it's less about creating something entirely new and more like an uncovery, as he calls it.
Yeah, exactly. An uncovery process. The wonder child, that essential self, was always there. It was just hidden, buried, suppressed by the wounded self's survival strategies. The healing work clears the way for it to be revealed, to emerge, and that leads to a process of authentic self-creation, living from that core.
Wow. Okay, so we've really traced this journey from understanding the roots of adult pain in the wounded inner child through the often difficult but necessary work of healing and reparenting, all the way to the emergence of this vibrant, essential wonder child.
It's quite a path Bradshaw lays out. Definitely requires courage, commitment, perseverance. But the source material really emphasizes that this journey, this homecoming, leads to profound transformation, to greater wholeness, creativity, authenticity, a deeper connection with ourselves, and maybe something larger, that ground of being he talks about.
It really is about reclaiming that vital energy, isn't it? That potential that might have been locked away for safety for so long. So it may be building on that idea that the wonder child represents our deepest creative and spiritual spark. Here's something for you, the listener, to ponder.
How might you start to listen more closely, perhaps, to those subtle nudges, those quiet intuitions, those moments of unexpected joy or curiosity from your own inner child, recognizing that maybe, just maybe, that's your unique creative power, your spiritual calling, trying to emerge, trying to guide you, just like Bradshaw's guided him, toward your most authentic self and your life's true purpose.